Slave Ship to Narnia, written by Nehemiah Ward, narrated by Nehemiah Ward. Chapter 1 An Unexpected Meeting. The rhythmic lapping of the waves against the dock was a sound Scott Vandal usually found calming. This morning, though, it did nothing to settle the storm inside him. He stood on the deck of his yacht, the Revillion, in the Duncannon harbor, staring out at the horizon toward Hook Lighthouse, where the sea stretched endlessly under the golden glow of the early sun. The air smelled of salt and damp wood, mingled with diesel fumes from a nearby fishing trawler preparing to depart. Seagulls circled above, their cries cut through the otherwise still morning. This was his domain, the open water, the endless blue expanse where no one could touch him. But today he wasn't sailing for pleasure. A voice behind him broke through his thoughts. "Mr. Vandal?" Scott turned to find a woman standing at the edge of the dock. She was dressed in a gray blazer with a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her short hair was swept neatly behind her ears. Beside her stood a small, quiet figure. He recognized his son, Caspian, from the few pictures Helen had sent him. The boy looked even smaller in person than he had imagined from the last photo he had received. His dark curls were unbrushed, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of a navy hoodie that looked too big for his frame. He wasn't moving. Instead, his expression was blank. His big green eyes, the same shade as Helen's, staring at the wooden planks beneath his feet. The woman cleared her throat. "I'm Mabel Kirk from Child Protective Services. I tried to reach you on the telly, but I couldn't raise you. After reading your file, I thought I might find you here. I found the address to your flat from a letter you wrote in your wife's desk. Your wife, ex-wife, was in an accident, and you are now the sole guardian of your son Caspian." Mabel Kirk had spent the last 15 years working in Child Protective Services, and in that time she had learned to manage the emotional weight of her job. She had seen every kind of broken home, every version of parental failure, neglect, addiction, abuse, abandonment. Some cases stuck with her more than others, but she had always been able to maintain a professional distance. It was the only way to survive in this line of work, but this case was different. Scott Vandal was not the kind of guardian she wanted for Caspian. She had read his file, what little there was of it, an absentee father, a man who had chosen a life at sea over the responsibility of a child, a man whose name appeared nowhere in Caspian's life except on a birth certificate. He had been a ghost to his son, vanishing into the open water while Helen Vandal did the hard work of raising Caspian alone. Helen's death had come suddenly, a car accident on a rain-slick road. There had been no time to prepare Caspian. One day he had a mother, the next he had nothing, except a father who barely knew he existed. Mabel had pushed for alternative options. Surely there was someone else, a grandparent, an aunt, a godparent, who could take him in. But Helen's will had been clear. Caspian was to go to Scott, and the law, for all its flaws, was bound to honor that final wish. Still, she didn't trust him. Scott nodded, unable to find his voice at first. He glanced down at Caspian again, noting the way the boy's shoulders were slightly hunched, as if bracing for something. His stomach twitched. "Right." He swallowed hard. "So, this is him." Mabel gave him a pointed look. "This is Caspian." Scott exhaled through his nose. "Yeah, Caspian." The name felt foreign on his tongue. He had imagined holding his son and knowing him, but he hadn't said the name aloud in years, not since Helen's last letter, before she stopped writing altogether. He'd convinced himself back then that staying away was best. Now the choice was staring him in the face. Mabel knew the signs of an unfit parent. She had spent years honing her instincts, and something about Scott Vandal set her on edge. Maybe it was the cavalier attitude she had seen in the way he carried himself. Maybe it was just the way he had asked, "So this is him," as if Caspian were some abstract concept rather than a grieving child. He seemed more concerned with how Caspian would fit into his job or how he would fit into his life instead of what the boy was going through. But the decision was out of her hands. She had taken this job because she believed in second chances, in giving children the safety and stability they deserved. Her own childhood had been far from perfect. She had grown up in the foster system, bouncing from house to house, always wondering when the next move would come. By the time she was 16, she had stopped hoping for permanence. It wasn't until college that she found her purpose. A social work professor had seen something in her, something beyond the walls she had built to protect herself. You understand what these kids go through, he had told her. That makes you exactly the kind of person who should be fighting for them. And she had. Now, standing on the dock, watching Scott Vandal size up his own son like he was a burden, or was it fear, rather than a blessing, Mabel felt the familiar stirring of doubt. Would he be there for Caspian when it counted? Would he put the boy first, or would he let him slip through the cracks? She didn't have those answers yet. No boy should feel like they had nowhere left to go. But she would be watching. Mabel placed a firm but gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. His mother made arrangements in her will for you to take custody. Given the circumstances, we had to act quickly. Caspian needs stability. Stability. The word hit Scott like a wave crashing against the bow. He wasn't sure he even knew what that meant. His life was made up of open water, long stretches of solitude, and the occasional job ferrying wealthy clients to tropical destinations. None of that had room for an 11-year-old kid. But that didn't matter now. He forced himself to kneel, bringing himself to the boy's level. "Hey, kid." Caspian lifted his gaze for only a second before looking away again. His face was unreadable, a mask of quiet detachment. Scott hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I know this isn't easy for either of us." He exhaled. "But we'll figure it out." The boy glanced up with a hint of something on his face, but said nothing. Scott glanced back at Mabel. "I have a job to do. We're headed out today. It's not exactly ideal, but I'll make room for him on the boat." Mabel studied him, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This is only permanent if Caspian is your priority. We'll be checking in." Scott nodded. "Understood." Mabel knelt next to Caspian and spoke softly. "I'll be calling to check on you, okay? If you ever need anything, you can always reach me." Caspian gave a small nod, but his expression didn't change. With a sigh, Mabel straightened and handed Scott a folder. His documents: birth certificate, school records, emergency contacts. Scott looked at it and shoved it under his arm. He glanced down at Caspian, then back at his yacht. The thought of bringing him aboard felt strange, like forcing two worlds together that had never been meant to collide. But now they were crashing into each other. He was forced to reconcile his past with his present. "Come on, kid," he said, adjusting the strap on his duffel bag. "Let's get you settled." Caspian followed him onto the yacht without a word. Scott stepped onto the deck, leading the way to the cabin. As he opened the door, the familiar scent of salt, teak wood, and the lingering traces of last night's coffee filled the space. Scott thought, it wasn't much of a home for a child, but it had a galley kitchen and a small dining nook, and a living area that doubled as storage for his charts and gear. "This is home," Scott said, more to himself than to the boy. Caspian stood in the doorway, unmoving. His fingers clenched and unclenched on his sides. Scott sighed. "You can take the spare bunk." He gestured toward a sleeping area near the back of the cabin. It wasn't much. There were two small beds. Scott pointed to the one with a navy blue blanket and a porthole overlooking the water. It looked like it could be comfy. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he walked over and set his backpack down beside the bed, then sat on the edge, his posture stiff. Scott lingered in the doorway, feeling an unfamiliar weight pressing against his chest. He had spent years running from this exact moment, and now there was nowhere left to go. Outside, the harbor was coming alive. The hum of boat engines, the call of deckhands prepping their vessels, the distant ring of a buoy bell. "I made some breakfast before you arrived. You're welcome to eat it if you're hungry." Scott looked at the boy again and then turned toward the helm. "I need to get moving." This trip was supposed to be about settling his debt. Now it was about something else entirely. He just didn't know what yet.